boldly engaging the mindless propaganda of our time, apparently with reason. This is Rage of the Age.
This is Rage of the Age, and we have with us today the author of Polarized, The Case for Civility in the Time of Trump, an experiment in the civil discourses on Facebook. I want to introduce to you today Jeff Rasley. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Philip. Good to be with you.
So what prompted you to write that book?
Well, so the 2016 election occurred, and I personally voted for the losing side, but I had a lot of friends that voted for the winning side. But what concerned me more than the actual result initially was how angry people were. The anger, of course, was mostly on the losing side, but there had been a lot of anger on the Republican side during the Obama administration. And something that really struck me one day, I'm out jogging on this hiking trail near my house, and I see a friend, and I know he's a liberal Democrat, and he's kind of staring off into the sky. And so I said, Steve, how you doing? What's going on? And he shakes his head and he says, I think I'm going to move to Canada. And he goes on to explain that he is so upset that Donald Trump was elected that he's going to move out of his homeland where he's lived all his life.
Right.
So I thought this is just gone beyond kind of the result of a normal election. And I thought, I want to do something about this. And so I started a political discussion on my Facebook page, my personal page, and I hosted it. And I invited all of my friends and anyone else who wanted to participate. And I had one rule, and the only rule was that if you were going to participate, you could not personally attack anybody else that was participating. So no ad hominem attacks. Right. Say anything you want about politicians. And if you're going to express opinions, please try to support it with evidence, logic, but express any opinion you want. And every week we had a different topic.
Okay.
And it was actually surprisingly successful. There were ultimately 80 participants, and it went on for 10 weeks. And then I finally ended it because I just kind of ran out of gas of being the moderator.
Right.
But I thought it was so interesting that I ended up writing a book about it, which is the one you cited. And so the book talks about the history of polarization in our country, why it reached such a peak during the 2016 campaign and throughout the Trump presidency. So there's a history of that issue, but then also an analysis of the current situation, how social media has contributed to polarization, and then a description of the Facebook experiment in civility and how it worked and why it worked relatively well.
You mentioned social media's contribution to this polarization. Are you saying that there was no other entities polarizing America until social media came along? Because
no.
I look at the conglomeration news agencies as doing the exact same stuff as social media does. Before social media even came on board, that was happening.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to the Civil War and the Lincoln-Douglas debates and kind of track through. But in terms of the modern era, the AM talk radio was, in my view, sort of the first big new contributing factor to it. Then came cable news, then came social media. So those were kind of three really important technologies or media that have contributed to polarization.
Do you think the polarization was caused by it, or it just reveals it more?
I think both. For example, talk radio. I mean, just pick on him, and kind of unfortunate that he's dead now. But Rush Limbaugh was a
Right.
very polarizing source, and there were a lot of imitators. I mean, we had here I'm in Indianapolis. We had two or three different kind of Rush Limbaugh light local personalities trying to do the same thing, who had very pointed and angry political views. And so if you got on air as a call-in and you were on the other side, you got
Mm,
attacked.
mm.
If you were on the host side, then you were kind of praised, and Rush called them ditto heads. Um, but so yeah, I do
Yeah.
think that each of those media contributed to the polarization.
Polarization in my mind, though, would mean two sides splitting apart. So I don't think this was a one-sided move by any means, was it?
No, no, certainly not. In fact, interestingly, on my experiment in Facebook, about two-thirds of the participant were Clinton voters and about one-third Trump voters. But when I sent out the initial invitation, um, I had 12 so-called friends, and these actually 12 were people who were friends of mine, not just
Right.
Facebook friends.
Right. Your name
Um,
only. Yeah.
yeah, who,
Right.
who messaged back and said they absolutely would not participate in any forum where they would have any contact with a Trump voter, because they didn't want to have anything to do, even a Facebook
Right.
conversation with
Right.
somebody who voted for Trump. So yeah, I mean the polarization in my own experiment was certainly there was it was, if we're going to place blame, the blame goes both ways.
Right. Because your book mentions in the time of Trump. I mean, I don't know if you were trying to insinuate that he started it or if it's just magnified by the attention he brought to it. Because I think through history, like you mentioned, of the nation, when was there a time we were not polarized in this country? I mean, we've always had bipolarism going on uh, as a part of our national history. This really isn't a new phenomenon, isn't it?
It's new to the degree that we have it now. There's actually um, social science data on
Hmm.
degree of polarization, which like I said, I tracked it back to the Civil War.
Yeah.
And we had, by the very sort of objective data that you can use, in the 2016, we had the highest level of polarization since the Civil War, even higher than during the civil rights and Vietnam era, which surprised me. I mean, having
Hmm.
lived through, I
Right.
was, yeah, I mean, I was born in '53, so just a little bit too young to go to Vietnam. But I would have thought that we were more polarized then, but the data that I could find indicated no, we're even more polarized now.
What was his data basing its criteria on? I mean, what are they looking at that's different from then to now?
Yeah.
What's their go-to thing of see this shows that we're more polarized when, like you said, you've seen polarization a good part of your life just the same.
Yeah, well, there's two major sources of data. One is social surveys, and the Pew Research has
Hmm.
done surveys on polarization for decades. So that was one
Hmm.
source. The other source is congressional voting record, and so you can track how often there's cross aisle voting versus how often there's almost straight party voting.
Hmm.
And the straight party voting in the last few years has been higher than, like I said, even during the Vietnam War and Civil Rights era.
Right. By comparison to those, I would believe you're right that there has been more of a straight party voting in our time as opposed to, like, say, the 70s or the 80s or something. But how about compared to the Civil War? Yeah, I mean, that was kind of pretty much mostly party voting, wouldn't you think?
Yeah,
I mean, we go through these things, I think, this polarization.
well, yeah, you're right. I mean, there are cycles of higher polarization, lower polarization,
Hmm.
but the thing that's interesting, and I really think to a certain degree dangerous for our democracy, is that if we're at a level that's higher than it's been since the Civil War,
Hmm.
that's dangerous. And I think the so-called insurrection that we saw on January 10th showed that was kind of the tip of the spear of the danger, that people would actually violently assault and invade the Capitol because they were convinced that the election had been stolen from Trump. I mean, we haven't had something like that since the Civil War.
Yeah. But we've had incidents at the Capitol before that just don't get as much coverage. And all the whole year before that, we have seen carnage the whole year of 2020, getting just kind of somewhat treatment. I mean, because in my mind, I'm thinking there's cases where that could have been viewed as insurrection in some places, attacking federal buildings and things like this and attacking law officers. And that's kind of, organized stuff. To me, that's as much as a threat as when the police open the things at the Capitol, say, go on in, and they enter into the building and they didn't attack, they didn't burn it down or hunt down officials. I mean, my view of insurrection, maybe the definition's a little different, perhaps, but you're right, though. I wouldn't dream of those things taking place, but they are. And that I think that shows a level of the intensity of what our polarization has done.
Yeah, the Black Lives Matter protests that turned into violent riots in a bunch of cities following the George Floyd killing, showed a tremendous intensity, and that's in a way was specific to one issue. I mean, it was very specific to police treatment of Black people. Um, and there probably you could find related issues, but that really was the motivating factor of those protests and those riots. Whereas the invasion of the Capitol building was also very specific, but it was specific to a political event, to an election, to support for a particular candidate. And so I think there's a qualitative difference there, although in terms of the polarization, I think it's pretty fair to say, obvious to say that most of the BLM protesters were leftists. Most of the insurrectionists were Trumpists. So, that's where those are the extremes of the polarization spectrum.
Well, definitely a polarization, but so for example, what's still going on in Portland by Antifa, do you not view that as insurrectionist activity?
Um,
Because they're
well,
leftists? I mean,
no,
is
I mean,
only a right wing person an insurrectionist in this case, or is it? I mean, our labeling, I think, is misguided sometimes in how we confront our issues.
yeah, I mean, I think we need to define what does insurrection mean,
Hmm.
and I've been using the term in the way the popular news media labeled the attack on the Capitol. I mean, it's been called an insurrection.
Right.
The Where the BLM protests turned violent, those have been called riots. So I've
Mostly peaceful riots.
well, depending on who you're listening to.
Well,
That,
that's what I'm saying. It's
that I mean,
The polarization is to the point of, I know it looks bad, but I don't want to say it is because, I kind of, don't want to say it. So I'll just reword it somehow. I mean, it's insane.
yeah, but see, that goes to the cable news contribution to polarization,
Right.
because the cable news stations have decided we have a certain market. So
Yeah.
Fox News, our market is right-wing Republicans. MSNBC, our market is left-wing Democrats. And so the way they will cover events and the way they'll even phrase their description,
Mhm.
I mean, your point is right on
Yeah.
in terms of that. Yeah.
I guess then the challenge in our age now is can we have a civil discourse and somehow not invite the cable news, somehow not invite the main newspapers, somehow not invite, I don't know, how do you not invite social media? Because that's kind of harder. But how do you bring a level of discourse to discuss civics without having to want to destroy each other?
Well, in the case of my Facebook forum, the way I did it is by laying down that one simple rule. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot attack somebody else participating on a personal level. You can attack their views, their opinions,
Right.
their
Right.
statements. And there's an organization which has devoted itself, and it's called Braver Angels. I was actually one of the early members of the organization, but this organization has taken a very interesting approach to attacking polarization, and the way they do it is they will put together groups that are evenly divided between right wing, left wing, Democrats,
Mm-hmm.
Republicans, polarized groups, and
Right.
then take them through a weekend sort of training session where they teach them how to talk to each other in a civil way.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done this all across the country, and the organization has grown into now having a newsletter and several thousand members. But it started out as very much just a grassroots movement,
Yeah.
which is what I concluded in my book, is that we can't depend on this changing from the top,
Uh,
because the media is invested. They make money off polarization.
well, you definitely hit where I was going. If we're depending on this to happen from, like you said, above, that it's not just media; it's the politicians too. It's parties, it's interest groups. They have political power and a source of revenue from this thing. They're not just going to let it go. It's their money bag. It's their source of animating voters and getting people angry to do what they want. They're not just going to cease doing it.
Yeah, and um, the media, I think, discovered this, or maybe rediscovered it,
Yeah.
uh, with talk radio, and they saw how this guy who nobody'd really heard of before, named Rush Limbaugh, was able to generate this huge following because of kind of playing up the anger of people that agreed with him, and so oh my, there's a huge market here. Well, Fox News jumped on that bandwagon, and then the other cable stations saw the opportunity. Okay, well, there are all these left wing Democrats, so let's get that market. And once you've segmented your market that way, I just don't. How do you end that? I mean, people who are invested in Fox News, as that's my go-to station, are they going to now switch to you know, some station that it now tries to just be very objective and middle of the road? No, because it's not as satisfying. It's satisfying emotionally to hear people pitching the news in the way that you agree with, that, plays to your own biases.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
I've definitely seen, on social media, especially, people lamenting something that a news station said or did or reported, and I'm not watching them no more, and I'm going to watch these. It's like, it is one article or one episode. I mean, come on. Surely you could be challenging your thinking there. But like, they could have been like watching Fox News for 20 years or something, and all of a sudden something came out and like, that's it. I'm not watching them ever again. And I'm sending them an email, and and you shouldn't listen to them either. And then say, I've seen the same thing with CNN or whatever. It's insane. I don't like being stuck with one source of news myself anyway.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I find it interesting to switch around through the different stations and, get different points of view. But most people don't. In fact, there is social research that I cite, social science research I cite in my book on it's particularly Facebook and Twitter, where they have social scientists have tracked where do you go to get your news on social media, depending on your point of view. And the data is pretty convincing that most people look for news that agrees with their point of view, with their political affiliation, and they don't look for news that challenges or or op-eds that challenge their point of view. I mean, one thing I found that was interesting is there is a slight difference between conservatives and liberals on this point, and conservatives do seek out a different point of view slightly higher than liberals do. So, in other words, liberals tend to want to or tend to have a confirmation bias slightly more than conservatives do. That I don't know what to make of that, although I thought that also kind of tracks with my experience of having the 12 liberal Democrat friends say they absolutely would not participate in a discussion that involved Trump voters.
That's curious to me, because in my mindset, I know maybe I'm in the minority nowadays, but I'm thinking, if I have the opportunity to explain why I see what I see, I don't see that as a bad thing, right? And if I have to engage other people's thought processes, that doesn't bother me, because one, either I'm confident in what I know and I'm not threatened by anything that counters it, or I'm going to learn something I didn't know before and be that much more smarter for it. That's probably not what's happening, is it? It's straight up like a fear, like you might, I don't know, why would you not participate?
Yeah, I find it very disappointing in the human, in Homo sapiens,
Sure. Yeah.
because I agree exactly what you said. I mean, aren't we curious creatures? Isn't learning all about being challenged in the knowledge and beliefs and opinions that we have? And how will we learn more? How will we advance from where we are if we're not challenged? If we're not exposed to different points of view and to information we didn't have before.
But because now we're talking about polarization of beliefs, and you know, maybe some people getting intense with how they present it, and having one-sided confirmation and the anger that can be generated from this. But this is kind of escalated, I think, to now where not only is it like, I won't participate with you, this is, I will shut you down. Not only do I'm not going to go listen to you, I refuse to let you be heard by anybody else, is now where we're at. Now, that's to me, we've had episodes of that in the country here and there, but I don't know, when I compare the historicity of it, it seems like there's an attitude in this country to where no one cares about First Amendment speech. It's just straight up, if I don't like you, not only I'm not going to listen to you, but I will shut you down and I will shut your platform down.
Yeah, I mean that's a danger, and another um, survey result that I found that I cite in the book that's really worrisome. I think is I think this was another Pew research. It asked millennials about their attitudes towards democracy, and the
Right.
result, one of the results was that about 34%, so a third of millennials, responded that they did not find uh, democratic institutions or democratic elections as important. And
As a as important compared to what?
well, I mean, I'm not sure.
Hmm.
Uh, but I do cite in the book that survey, and so you can find more details about it. But the thing that's troubling is well, I mean, it's the answer to your question is okay.
Yeah.
Then what? What
Right.
a fascist dictatorship, a
I,
communist dictatorship?
I know.
I mean, what, a monarchy?
Right.
I mean, what is the alternative? None of them have looked very attractive to me.
That seems to be, though, at least my take on how I'm viewing things. A lot of people tend to view the go nuclear option in the polarization problem. They see this polarization as a problem rather than civil discourse, actually engaging ideas. This is, well, how can I just shut them? We'll impose our will and you just have to kind of go along with it. There, no more polarization. We're in unity. But like you said, that's a dictatorship. We've what have we accomplished in the supposed solution to the polarity?
Yeah, I mean, I think most Americans have a really high degree of confidence in the strength of our democracy. And history, so far, I think would confirm that we should have. But
Hmm.
there, there are historical examples where countries, democratic countries, became communist and or fascist dictatorships.
Right.
So making that transition is not impossible. And so when you see people that are willing to violently try to impose their view, whether it's a BLM riot or whether it's a Trump supporting quote insurrection, that's when it's scary. Now, I have a son who's a captain in the National Guard, and
Hmm.
he sort of tells me, yeah, you don't need to worry that much because as long as the military is going to support our democratically elected government, there's no force that is going to be able to defeat the United States military. And okay, I take some comfort from that, but to even think that we need to worry about that is not so comforting.
Well, I served 20 years in the military myself, and in some ways, I would agree with his assessment, but not fully. It depends on the scenario. It depends on the fight. Sure, if we're fighting insurrectionists, actual insurrectionists in Iraq or Afghanistan, we look pretty good. Going toe to toe of other people who aren't afraid to trade losses with you, that's a wholly different matter. The military I've seen has gone through quite a bit of a downgrade of efficiency and discipline, in my opinion, over many years. Our technology is what gives us an advantage, but that gap's quickly closing around the world. And it's different if you're engaging your own people versus you're abroad. Now you're home. Where do you go after your deployment? You can't go home because you're in it right here. It's a totally different animal. To I mean, I hope we never have to test that. I hope we don't ever have to push that button because it's an ugly scenario. Because then you have to worry about there's polarization in the military. which side you going to pick? Who are you going to defend? Are you going to push so hard to carry out these orders, or are you going to kind of be a little more laxed here? And already I've seen in this year this conflict over what's going on in military based upon political polarization views.
Yeah, the stand down over the concern about white nationalist extremists
Mm-hmm.
that the military just went through, a month ago or so, fairly recently.
Yeah.
I mean that the concern is that great is concerning. Um, I mean, I think it was legitimate. Um, and I don't care whether it's white nationalists or Marxist Leninists, whatever, if the military is truly concerned that any sort of extremist group that will resort to a violent or attempt a violent overthrow of our government,
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, let's get rid of those people.
Well, absolutely. But I've been in many stand downs in the military. A lot of them are just initiated as a knee jerk, just in case maneuver, whether there's a problem or not. I don't know if you have weird people in the military that get chapped out all the time with these crazy views, for sure. Now, as far as if there's a conspiracy to use the military in such a manner, I don't believe that at all. I really don't.
Yeah, and I am certainly no expert on this issue, and this isn't addressed by the book,
Right.
but it does seem like, from what I can tell watching media reports, that the concern really is more that extremist groups are recruiting people coming out of the military,
Well, yeah.
and you can understand
On both
why.
sides, on both extremes, that this would be happening.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. The last book I wrote is a novel,
Okay.
and the novel is about a guy who is an anarchist extremist.
Hmm.
Um, and I actually met some anarchists way back uh, in the early '70s who were they would be the equivalent of Antifa today, but they
Hmm.
were in an organization that went to where there were anti-war or civil rights protests and engaged in tactics to try to turn those peaceful protests into violent riots.
Right.
And so I took what I learned from these guys, years and years ago, and it inspired me to create a character and then this is in modern times though, so it was the jumping off point was the George Floyd inspired BLM protests.
Hmm.
So, but it was fun. It
But
was fun to be able to do it as fiction.
well, yeah, until you see it for real unfold. That's another aspect that I think we deal with in this country that maybe we didn't have as much before. We have a organizations that don't believe in civil discourse, and they believe in just straight up grabbing power, and that means taking over peaceful protests and making it violent. Well, that's happened recently numerous times, right? Um, Using violence, they're not concerned about presenting their ideas and people receiving them. They just want to force it. Period. To me, that those groups have grown in number and power, and if I may be so bold, support or semi-sanctioning by people who should be calling it out rather rather than letting it exist because of some kind of gain they can get from it. If we have an increase in this, the point of civil discourse is going to come to a quick end, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I think that that's just the way extremists are.
Right.
I mean, once you believe you have the absolute truth, I mean, whether it's to the far right, fascism, or the far left, Marxism, or it's a form of religious fundamentalism, if you believe you absolutely have the truth and anybody who disagrees with you is wrong, it's it's a pretty short step to, and anybody who disagrees with me ought to be killed. you need to get out of the way. I mean, that's basically what Lenin said, and what Mao said when he said, something like, if 1 million people have to die to achieve true communism, so be it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think on the other side, Hitler is the same view. And
Right.
that my biggest concern about the future of our democracy is how many people will become extremists. And I don't care if it's left, right, religious, whatever, as opposed to being rational, pragmatic, problem solving people, which is what I think the best politician doesn't have any ideology. The best politician is like a doctor. They look at the problems that need to be solved and they try to find good solutions to them. And I'm concerned that we have less politicians that way and we have less people, less voters that are that way.
Well, I guess part of it is we have to look at the base itself, the population. If well, you mentioned the millennials. If a population is content to not care about democracy or being a part of it or how it works, how long do you think is going to stand?
Um,
I mean, it's based upon a principle of the people are the ones who rule. And if they don't care and if they're fine to surrender that, I mean, I don't know, democracy would be in severe danger, I believe.
yeah, because if you have a large number of people that don't care, then that creates the space for extremists.
Mm-hmm. Well, that and the conflict, something to solve, some crisis to get a hold of and get people animated for sure. You were talking about in this debate that you had on Facebook. Was that like in the comments section? Was it some kind of live video feed? How did you work that?
No, it was just on my page, so I would post an issue like immigration, and I would come up with a one sentence statement of an issue, and I would try to state it in just a neutral, objective way, and then ask people to express their views on it, and then
Mm-hmm.
people would just start posting comments,
Right.
and we would get 30, 40 comments, and then there would be sort of sub threads that would develop on, if one comment was really interesting or provoking, then there would be comments to that comment, and so we'd go off and have multiple sub threads. And like I said, I it made me that experience at the time made me more optimistic about the strength of our democracy because, like I said,
Mm-hmm.
80 people um, participated in it, and we had civil discussions. Now, there were a few people who got mad and quit, and
Right.
there were a few people who just made inane comments, but most of the participants were, genuinely
Right.
interested in
Right.
expressing their opinion and hearing from the other side.
Did anyone move to Canada because of the thread, or I mean,
Not that I know of, but
that
but there were.
they didn't post I'm out of here going to
Well,
Canada.
actually, yeah, there were three people who posted, "I'm out of here. I'm going to quit this discussion because I
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
it's pissing me off too much." Basically, to listen to the other side.
that's insane. That's a dangerous place to be to be that angry
Yeah, in fact,
that you can't discuss, you can't express yourself. You've shut down.
the
Yeah.
most disappointing experience I had with it came right after the most wonderful, satisfying experience. So there's one guy that was a participant, um, was a very liberal, big time class action lawyer. And he was a friend of mine from college, University of Chicago. And he was a very liberal guy. There's another guy from my hometown, rural Indiana, and he was a small businessman. And so they were kind of going back and forth, and the temperature was rising a little bit, and there
Hmm.
was kind of point counterpoint. But then the conservative guy said, posted, I do appreciate the fact that you haven't called me ignorant, stupid, misogynist, racist, which is what so many liberals will call people who voted for Trump. And the other guy, the guy who lived in Manhattan, big time class action attorney, responds and he said, I don't know anybody personally that voted for Trump. All of my friends voted against Trump. He said, You're the first person I've actually engaged with who voted for Trump. And I thought, wow, isn't this great? The very next post from the liberal attorney guy was, I'm leaving. I've had enough of this. It's like, what? You just, so.
That was just too much. Last straw. Not going to take it no more. That's an amazing thing to consider, too, is you literally don't know anyone who voted for the opposition.
Yeah. I mean,
that's quite a bubble. I've never had that existence, honestly, myself. I find that amazing.
Well, when I was writing the book, one of the terms that had become popularized was siloing. That people live in a silo.
Right.
They have their social media they experience in a silo, and I thought, man, this guy talk about. I mean, most silos at least have some windows in them,
right? Something from the outside coming in. I mean,
yeah, a little fan to blow some breeze through there.
Wow, that's crazy. Well, hopefully people can meet other people. You can learn to express things without wanting to move to Canada or become outraged. That'd be wonderful to see. I tell you what. Where can we find Polarized at?
It's on Amazon. It can be ordered through any bookstore. I have a website, which is my full name, jeffreyrasley.com. You can find it on the website. So anywhere you can Google it, anywhere you buy books, you can find it.
Well, Jeff, I tell you what, it's been nice having a civil conversation with you today. I have no desire to move to Canada. I'm not outraged by our conversation. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Philip, I really enjoyed it too. It is a delight to engage with anybody about politics, and I'm glad we can do it civil.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
Welcome to the essay segment. As we were talking with Jeff in the interview, one of the main topics, and of course, the title of his book, has the word polarized in it. We were talking about the polarity of American politics, and we seem very polarized than maybe what many of us believe had existed prior. Of course, he brought up some different stats and things of what kind of hints that we're more polarized than we have been since the time of the Civil War. That may or may not be true, but I'm sure there is more polarity in the sense of there's more party determination. But I don't, and I think that's just because of reactions to each other. You have extreme groups pushing this envelope to where there's no realm of in between. But the idea that there's an idea that is prevalent among many in our country now, and I honestly don't know where it comes from. But there's this thought that only now we are polarized, and we somehow have deviated from a more virtuous time where we got along. That we're polarized now, but we weren't before. And what baffles me is it's not like just young people think this. Older people who've been around for a while seem to believe this for some reason. That we're more, they harken back to the good old days when we weren't so polarized. But I look through American history, and I can't really think of times when we were not polarized. There's brief moments where there's this surge of unity, but it's not the form of unit. It's not the form of application we want to use to, make us union, to make us unified. It's war. War against a common opponent brings us into a singular mind as a nation overall. Of course, you don't have 100% participation, but it gives the impression that the country is together in unity. Of course, 9/11, when that happened to us, that unified us in a way that many of us had never experienced before that. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, that got the nation on one direction, one mindset. And it's because there's unified objectives, it gives the appearance of that unity. But lurking underneath all that, there's always this polarization that goes on. From the very beginning, from the birth of this nation, we've been polarized. Many don't even understand that really truly because of history. It's not presented that way. But and really, that from that we have to really relearn basic principles that were being applied back in that day. It wasn't like they all thought the same. The British Crown didn't think that. They got rid of the crown and we lived happily ever after. There was a struggle after the victory to create a nation. You had those who wanted a very top-heavy, extreme government, just like the one in Britain. They would have been okay with a monarch. To in their minds, that it was this had worked so well. It had built the British Empire. It's obviously an effective system. Look at the power and the wealth it's generating. We should copy that for our new nation. And there were many who thought that way. Many of them became what was known as the Federalist. And not all Federalists were for a monarch, but there's this one side that was in favor of a stronger federal government to build national power, to unify the states together, and to have the force of law behind it, some teeth to where it can actually govern a nation at whole. But on the other side, you had what was known as the Republicans. That's just the short term. Republican Democrats was the full term. And they were also, you could say, the anti-federalists. They were against having a federal government with a lot of power. They were in fear of it. And this tension wasn't just a philosophical argument. This really played out into some nastiness. It was a true polarizing thing. There was a threat of civil war in the early days of our Constitution, just as much as there was a threat of civil war later on. And the only reason it survived is because of one man, and that's George Washington, the man that's popular to hate now. If he didn't exist there, the nation would look totally different now. I don't know. We'd be broken in pieces still, I think, honestly. He was the only figure that they could look up to that both sides were okay to deal with as a president. And since he was, they were going to leave him in as long as he'd live. But, of course, he resigned after the second term, setting the precedent until FDR broke it. And we had to make an amendment to say, no, you all get 2 terms. I think the Congress should be just as enthusiastic about themselves, honestly, as a lot of them need to get them rotten selves off their benches and go do something else. Go rob in some other fashion instead of robbing us this way. But from the very beginning, we've had this polarization in the country, and it's not like it stopped after the Federalists and the Republicans. That went through all the way to the Civil War. And then you have the aftermath and the after effects of the Civil War, which continue, and it goes on. And it's not just, the arguments get solidified into 2 camps. And we think that's peculiarly an American thing, but it's really not. It's a natural human thing. Polarization is normal. That's what we don't understand. Polarization is normal. Now, I know someone listening is going to be like, well, we should be like other countries. And of course, when they say that, I know they really don't know about the countries they're talking about. But nonetheless, they don't know them in depth enough. But let's take your argument. We should be like other countries. They have multiple political parties, and we should too. And I'm like, okay, make one. We have more than two parties. You did know that, right? I mean, that's just how lost we are in our logic sometimes. We have more than one party. There's multiple parties in this country. There's just two very big ones. And the reason is because of this idea of building coalitions. Now, in these places where you talk about they have all these different parties existing, the reason they can exist in the way they do is because they follow the British parliamentary model, where you have to build coalitions after the fact, right? What has happened in our nation is we build it before the fact, before the elections. And therefore, basically, two big camps form, because when you're building coalitions, eventually it comes down to just being two, because you build coalitions to be stronger than you are. The other side's going to do it too. So everybody basically lines up on a side that they think is best for them, because if their big side wins, then they have a better chance of getting what they want, versus if the opposite end gets what they want, right? We didn't invent polarization in the United States. And if you assume there's no polarization in the nations across the world, you are really not paying attention. I mean, we inherited this polarization from the British, between the Whigs and the Tories in their time. And a lot of their different ideas and concepts we brought over with us. We didn't form in a vacuum, right? When you look at any nation that has a free and open political process, you're going to have polarity. There's going to be polarization. You're not going to avoid it. It's impossible. With that in mind, then consider this, that when the Constitution was made, it was made fully knowing that they were polarized. This is maybe something we need to re-grasp here. These were groups of people, states, which had two different main philosophical approaches. You had to fight with this tension. We still fight with this tension now. How much power should a federal government have in order to be an efficient government, but not have so much that it has the ability to trample our rights like the Crown did? We want a unity, but not at the expense of liberty. Where's that line at? How's that mixture go? That's what they were contending with in the Constitution. The Constitution, to me, is a very beautiful document, because you brought people of different mindsets and temperaments together with things to lose, things to gain, things they're trying to accomplish, things they're trying to avoid. And they hashed this thing out as an agreement to government, that we will agree to live under this government under these conditions. And that's what they hashed out. This wasn't an imposed document. In other words, it was the best they could do with all their different standings and thought processes in order to form this government. And we call this, of course, by the Constitution. It's the supreme law of the land. But it was agreed to by states to come into this union, that we will only be a part of this union if it runs this way. Now, when you look at the Constitution, you're like, well, maybe it's not efficient here. Maybe this doesn't look great here. But the thing is it didn't exist to be a computer efficient program to force everything into its spot and to do what is told. It was an arrangement to have a government sufficient enough to be a government, but not be strong enough to impose upon issues that people didn't want imposed upon. And it was just sort of this agreement that we will coexist this way. Otherwise, we won't coexist. We fail to understand that if there was no Constitution, We could have very well had independent states which become their own countries anyway, and we just kind of hang out together. That's really what could have been the result. In hindsight, we don't see that. But right now, we're seeing it played out now, where if you have all these people who seem at odds with each other, how do we live together under one system? Well, the attempt has been this. We will force our way on you and make you fit our system. That's cool if you're on that side and you have the power. But it's not cool when the other power is forcing its way on you. And this is the fight that we have with the federal government today. People don't seize power at the federal level because they want to do good for the country. There's a few, but I think most of them lie when they give that impression. It's because they want the power it has in order to force what they want, their vision, on everybody else, whether they want it or not. To me, that's what's really at stake here. The Constitution was meant to try to avoid that scenario, but hey, here we are. We have this polarity. It's natural. We have it now. Why does it seem so scary now? And I think Jeff pointed out something that makes it scary. See, for the longest time when we've had these arguments, these polarizations in our nation, it was based upon various aspects of liberty and constitutionality and trying to make things work in that capacity. But now we have come to a point where we have a good part of the population that doesn't care about the Constitution, does not believe in the institutions of democracy, and they're open for anything. Why? Well, one is because of the stupid idea that, well, we're so polarized, and it's probably because it, and I love it, it's social media's fault. I don't believe that. I really do not believe that, right? It's social media's fault. It's the fault of democracy. We need this in line to keep this in. Basically, you want things in power with more power to force people to not be antagonistic, to not have, well, opposing views. And that's all fine and well until you're on the other end receiving it. And this is the great danger. It's so tempting to grab that fruit hanging from the tree. It's a forbidden fruit indeed, but man, it looks so good. And if I could just have that, if I could just get a bite of that, imagine what I can accomplish. Now, of course, you're thinking in your own terms. You're thinking in the vision that you have, which may or may not work, but you don't care. It's just a vision you want, and it's going to come to pass. And how's it going to come to pass? Because when I grab that power, I can then begin to squeeze and force others into line. Oh, and then we'll have unity. Like North Korea, like China. Oh, they put on a face of unity. But I tell you, with underneath that surface, there's a lot of jockeying for power. And especially in those scenarios, because when you hold power there, you truly hold power, and competition is very fierce and nasty. It's that thing that power, the grab of power is what makes it a problem. But now people look at this polarity not in the realms of ideas of liberty and freedom and the Constitution. None of that. It's just it bothers you. There's this other group with this contrary opinion. Oh, that bothers me. Somebody should shut them up. Well, again, that's great, as long as it's them and not you. But here's the fallacy. You assume that because of the coalition you're currently in, will always think exactly the way you do and do what you want. But it's a coalition, meaning you have people joined up trying to gain power through the strength of numbers, through the strength of allies. But in the end, once your foe is quote unquote subdued, that coalition will break apart and fight within itself for the power that remains. You yourself will become a target. But we're okay with that. No one's thinking that far ahead. No one cares. And we're okay with people being silenced. We're okay with people being financially attack. We're okay with FBI being used as a political weapon. We're okay with the military being subverted to use it for against political enemies. Why? Because you think you won't be the target. Time and time again, history has shown that many who thought they were going to wield that sword end up falling by it just the same. And I guess that's my plea today is to pay attention to what's going on. Stop giving people power that don't need power. We were fine not giving it to them before, but now we want to exercise it. We have got to keep checks and balances in place. We have got to limit these monopolies that are becoming like governments in themselves. But it seems that people want this quick route of I'll just seize power and force my way. And it never works. It never works. Oh, you'll get power. You'll force your way, but it's never received. It's resisted. See, China and North Korea put on this good face, but I guarantee you there are people within those systems, however they can, they are sabotaging it and fighting against it in whatever way they can. They're not like suddenly in love with a system that crushes them. That's just never the case. You see the official version. When you see things from China and how good it looks, you see their picture. They show you the videos they want you to see. You hear the propaganda of the state. You know it's one-sided propaganda. Why do you take that at face value? There are many in opposition to it. I mean, Hong Kong alone is one example, and I bet you there's many that if they had the opportunity, they would turn on the regime in China. They absolutely would. And honestly, I think that's something the United States should revisit in line of recent events and how things are heading. But nonetheless, it brings me to my final point, which to me is the most disturbing part of my essay. And I hope to get through it with a sense of composure. This is really what I wanted to talk about. And it disturbs me. For a long time, it had been really keeping me up at night. I had been losing sleep, just seeing visions of the possibility of what could happen in this nation. But because we have gotten to the point where seizing power by any means and using it for any means is becoming the main course of a lot of people, and a lot more people are becoming okay with it, it's going to lead to conflict here, the likes of which we never would imagine possible within these borders. And that troubles me in so many ways. If you push so hard for that power, you're going to alienate the other coalition, the other side. And it's going to be full of different types of people gathered together, just like these coalitions are. If one coalition makes the grab for power, which I believe the left is doing that right now, trying to root out enemies in the military, trying to make it a political entity, trying to defund the police, it's because they usually support the conservatives. That's why. It has nothing to do with anything else. They want to defund their enemies, right? This massive attempt to suppress conservative voice and the use of censorship, using the FBI against political enemies. This is escalating beyond anything it should. Now, I know many are like, you have your excuses for why all this is done. You think it's the greatest thing, that every freedom-loving government would do this. You're an idiot. You're an absolute idiot. I would not approve of this if it was the other way around. And this is why. When you pull that trigger, you've basically declared war on the nation. I'm seizing power and I don't care what it's going to cost, and we're going to do it. And it's done. But here's the thing. The other side ain't going to just take it. And then you will have what you keep claiming is an insurrection. See, I had been to places like Iraq fighting actual insurrectionists. So when I hear that term, I just want to smack every journalist that has the audacity to use it when they don't even know what it is. I've actually fought insurrectionists. literally. They look nothing like what happened on 6 January. If that was an insurrection, the targeted congressman in that building could probably have been dead. Seriously. It wouldn't be a selfie session is basically what it turned into. They certainly didn't set fire to the place, right? They weren't snatching up people, making examples of them. This was no insurrection. But if one were to happen, this is what it would look like, and this is where I hope we don't ever have to go. See, an insurrection doesn't happen in a day. It goes on and on and on. And as long as the hated entity that is in power is there, the motivation to face it will always be there. And which makes them want to be more heavy-handed. They're already heavy-handed now. With the slightest pretext, they put 25,000 troops in Washington, D.C. for an event that no one was invited to. That's meant to be a signal that will come after you. We control the military, you don't. That's a signal, which means they'll use it if they want to. And that's the frightening thing. For all the verbal abuse that kept being thrown at Trump for, he's going to send in troops with the bayonet and kill everybody and to suppress these quote unquote peaceful protests. Well, he didn't use them. He didn't use them. There are many conservatives like, that's maybe you might want to rethink that. But when it comes in this case, Biden's the greatest president who ever walked the earth. Who cares if he mobilizes all these troops and surrounds the Capitol and makes it look like Baghdad with fences and controlled entry points to your capital? That is what that's become. And they're okay with it. Those who love Biden are okay with it, not knowing that very well could be done to you. But let's say it's not. Because here's, again, it's the draw is power. Let's say you get what you want. You get control of the military, you defund the police, and you create your own alternate police force because you know that's what you're going to have to do. Not to fight crime, but to enforce your political will. You know that's the direction it's heading. When you get that, and you get the war that you've wanted, you think it's going to be easy. But it's not. It took 25,000 to lock down just the Capitol. How many are you going to need to lock down every city in the United States? And then let's talk about all the territory in between those cities. Can you control all landmass within the United States with a military, half of which you don't trust? And then you assume that American soldiers want to engage Americans in battle. You even assume your military is efficient right now, which it's not. But let's say it is. You're really going to wage that war? You think it'll be over? You think it'll be like a one-day event like January 6th, and once the crowd's dispersed, we'll go back to normal? It won't be normal ever again. If you force that insurrection, it won't end in a day. It will go on for years. It could go on for 10 years. And you will create a cycle of vengeance and hatred, the like of which you never thought was going to be open. And you thought you could control it the whole time, but you cannot. See, insurrectionists don't fight militaries face to face. They fight around them. And what they begin to do is target you individually. You, your families, your jobs. Insurrectionists ruin economies, which if you don't have a good economy, you're not paying your army. And trust me, they're not going to work for free. I don't care how indoctrinated you make them. And then these soldiers have nowhere to go home. See, when I came home from Iraq, at least I got to leave that deployment. Where are our soldiers going to go where home is the war front? It's going to wear on a lot of them, and they're not going to want to stay. They're not going to want to do what you want to do. It's going to ruin the economy. It's going to ruin our nation for decades to come. Foreign nations will get involved in our fight and take advantage of it, funding each side to fight each other until to keep us destroying each other. This will have huge consequences. Now, For the other end, I mentioned this, and I'll close with this. There's some of you that are thinking, yeah, we should start an insurrection. Well, I want you to consider what you're saying, too. This isn't something you post on Facebook and you go about your life. You pull that trigger and we enter in that type of war, it's not going to be pretty for you either. You will never get to go home again. You will forever be on the move. Your family would have to follow you. Are you willing to do that to them as well as yourself? Are you willing to live like a criminal looking over your shoulder everywhere you go? Everything you do has to be in secret. You're not going to have this weekend warrior thing going on where you show up and fight and throw a flag and show that you have an AR-15 like everybody else. You'll have to actually use it. And you will have a military that is stronger than you hunting you down continuously with no rest. And this could go on again for many, many years. Basically, are you willing to end life as you know it for the rest of your life in order to accomplish your goal? If the answer is no, then shut up with your bravado. You don't know what you're talking about. You really don't. Neither side knows what they're talking about. We need to get back to basic principles for this nation. The reason that everyone is trying to grab governmental power for the power that it has to force their way on everybody is because it has too much power. We need to start gutting it. And of course, the citizens have to agree with that. But again, if we have if a growing number of the population continues to just not like democracy and hate America, hate the Constitution, and you're susceptible now to extremism, then you know what? We get what we deserve. We absolutely get what we deserve. You think you're going to force your way and all you're going to have is chaos and carnage. Oh, you might get to control the laws. You have the appearance of you force everybody to do what you want. But you're not going to do it with much safety. And you're going to have a nation in carnage. And of course, you'll be in denial. You'll never admit what you've done. But there'll be plenty who will remember you for it. But what we have now as a nation, which we've been very blessed with to have, will be destroyed because of it. It will not be the same. It might not even be anything left worth fighting over anymore. I guess it all comes down to what is worth fighting for. Making everyone do what I want them to do? Or is it basic things like we're different and we coexist? Toleration means I accept you even though I don't like what you got going on, but we'll coexist. Toleration is not endorsing everything because I said so, or I'll ruin your business and shut you down. Because trust me, you've set a precedent that others are going to try to follow, and it will come back on you. If we don't come to our senses and start putting things into balance, we are going to really bite off far more than we can chew, more than we expected to ever chew on.
You've been listening to Rage of the Age. If you loved today's podcast, make sure to leave a review on the media you're listening through. Secure future episodes by heading over to rageoftheage.com and clicking the RSS feed button. Until next time, this has been Rage of the Age.